Majo John Madden in my camper van. It is Wednesday night, Valentine's Day, the 14th of February. And I've had a pretty amazing day. I'm in Boca del Rio, which is several miles south of the downtown of Veracruz. Enormously affluent. I call it a suburb. They call it a municipality or something like that here in Mexico. I don't like this neighborhood. I love the beaches. They've got really beautiful beaches, and I had 3 great walks out on that beach today. And the sound of the waves always quiets my mind like almost nothing else. Swimming in the ocean quiets my mind even more. I just merge with the ocean and go back to it. Now, I'm going to keep my camera focused forward for a couple reasons. One is I don't know where any of the flashlights are in the car to shine on me. And more importantly, the theme of this talk. I promised a friend earlier today that I would make a video trying to summarize my take on spirituality. What's the meaning of life? What's God? Easy stuff like that. She had done it for me. She sent me an article she had written about an out-of-the-body experience that really basically described her experience of spirit. And I said to her in a text message today that my out-of-the-body experiences, which I've had many, are different than hers, and that rather than tell her here's where I agree, here's where I don't agree, that didn't feel good. I said I'll just do mine. I'll just describe what my out-of-the-body experiences are, have been, and what it, and with that and different from outside of that, what's my experience of spirit and the way the world works. And it boils, the beauty of not focusing the camera back in the selfie is that it all can be boiled down to, it's not about me. It's just not about me. No. And life beats me around the head and shoulders to get that point because I keep not getting it. One thing that has helped around that is that for almost 4 years, at the end of March it's going to be 4 years that I've been traveling. I left the beautiful mountain city of Asheville, North Carolina on March 28th, and I've been on the road ever since, mostly in places where I don't know anybody. So when I hallucinate that someone has yelled, "Hey John," or "Hey Majo," 98% of the time that's erroneous. It's just me wishing that somebody was acknowledging me. A friend of mine, Genevieve Fortuna, at the church I used to go to in Asheville, very progressive, Christian-based, but welcoming of everything, right down to Wiccan, pagan services. Genevieve was not the minister there, but she was the minister's sister, and once in a while when he was gone, she'd fill in. And on one Sunday, she started her talk by saying, however number of people there are in the world, let's say 8 billion, only 1/8 billionth of all this is about you. And I really could summarize most of the learning I've done over the last 4 years down to that. I have a myth in my life. At one point a long time ago, I went through something called rebirthing, and it was an energy technique where you would lie on your back and start doing deep breathing to where you got, I'd call it Kundalini now, a release of deep energy. And you'd feel lots of things. You'd go through all different kinds of feelings, and one of the things that some people experienced was memories of their birth. And I'm highly suggestible. You know, you say, boy, this party's, oh yeah, I was at a tea room, 50 years ago, And the Mexicans are so great. They're so great. Look at these 4 people, all touching, pretty much all touching. That's Mexico. And that's not about me, it's about us. So that's the last 11 months in Mexico has really helped with this, because Mexico is not a rugged independence culture. It is an interdependence culture where children get touched all the time by many, many extended family members, listened to all the time, loved and treated like a prince or princess all the time, pretty much. And they come out of that with the sense of we. They don't need the sense of personal space that we did in the U.S. They will stand nose to nose with you pretty much. They bounced back from COVID. I don't know what they did in the height of the COVID, but they're sure not keeping 6 feet distance now. They will cut you off in traffic. And there's a lot of places where in the U.S. there would be stoplights, and in Mexico there are not, in cities, outside of cities. So you work it out together. It's not, hey, it's my green light. No. Somehow together you sense, okay, it looks like this is the time for me to take my turn. So one of the myths of my life that came out of the rebirthing process was an image. Now I do know it's true that my mom was in labor. I was her first child, and she was like almost 40 at that time. Maybe almost 40. Maybe, I'm not sure about that one. I could calculate it, but not now. And she was in labor for an awful long time and got hysterical and started to pull instead of push. One birth memory I thought I got was that at one point I said, I'm dying in here, I'm getting out. I don't care what happens to her. I'm getting out of here. And it was like a first experience of I'm taking care of me. And on the airlines they say put your own mask on first. Sometimes you gotta do that. You gotta take care of yourself first. And so that's a mythic memory around that. But the other memory is that when I finally dropped, when I came out, the doctors and nurses were like talking to each other, and I didn't get the welcome I expected. No, there were no trumpets, there was no, look at this kid, he's amazing. No, nothing. It was like, it's a myth, it's a central guiding myth of my life is that I don't get enough attention. Yeah. I never did. So there's a way I'm a show off. I've been a show off my whole life, and who knows where it started. I was born 9 years into their marriage, and I was the miracle baby, the prince, the little prince. And then my brother, bless his heart, came along 16 months later, and it was like, oh, he's nice. He's nice also, but he lived in my shadow forever. And we've talked about that as adults. So how do you get it if your script is nobody's paying enough attention to me? How do you get it that that's really not the game? So part of it is travel, go places where nobody knows you. And when you think it's about you, ask yourself the question, am I really sure Byron Katie, her questioning in something she calls the work, is it true? Do you know for sure that it's true? What happens when you tell yourself it's true? What kind of outcomes do you get then? And what if you didn't believe it? What would your life be like if you didn't believe that notion? In this case, the notion that it's all about me. So I've been traveling in a camper van. The first year was in and around Asheville, mostly in the high mountains, but I'd go back to Asheville. And I was parked in one of my favorite spots in a park in Asheville during the COVID. And technically you weren't allowed to be parked in city parks overnight, but they winked at that during the COVID. And I was in the middle of making a videotape because I've been big into I used to be a writer forever, but for some reason, once I guess because things were so visual once I went out to the mountains, I learned really for the first time how to shoot videos in my iPhone. I was making a videotape letter to a friend, and a cop pulls down, and I travel in a big camper van, and cops visit me a lot. People call and say, who's this creepy guy in our neighborhood, stuff like that. So I'm in the middle of making a video, and a cop shows up, pulls up pretty much right next to my car, and I say, hi, officer, what's going on? Ready for him to say, there's a problem with you, and you gotta move. And he says, there's a report of a bear down there, so I gotta go check it out. So it had nothing to do with me at all. And when he came back, I said, did you find the bear? Yeah, he's back about 100 yards there, so he's no problem. It was only when he left I went, shit, there's a bear 100 yards away from me. Yeah. So it's not about me. I started this talk talking about out-of-body experiences. My out-of-body experiences started between age 6 to 10 when I was being sodomized in the woods behind my house by my very crazy uncle, very alcoholic and very crazy sometimes. And the memories went so fully away that for 25 years I was involved in something called reevaluation counseling, which is a peer self-help thing, which is pretty great stuff. And they would offer workshops for people who had been sexually abused, and I just never had a sense of that had anything to do with me. But in my early 40s, I had a perfect storm of life crises where I moved from Chicago, my hometown, which is my kind of town, has always fit me, has always supported me. It's a very working class town, and my family is very working class. I was the first generation to go to college. Chicago works for me. And I was working, I had my dream job. I had moved from psychology for 20 years. I was one of a cadre of student radicals. I was a student radical at college between 64 and 68. SDS members, Students for Democratic Society, sit-ins at the ROTC military training place at Loyola, working class college in Chicago. And so, why did I start that story? So, well, whatever. I left Chicago in my early 40s, which was really working for me. Dream job at AT&T, very exciting work all across the country, high levels, working with vice presidents. And my son was growing up in Louisville, Kentucky. We had split up in Syracuse, New York when he was 2. For 4 years, he was half-time with each of us. Then his mom finished her Ph.D. program and took a job in Louisville. They went to Louisville. I went to Chicago. I went back to Chicago and did my damnedest to stay involved in his life. I was crazy about him. He was my miracle baby. He was my heart. I've always called him my heart. So I'd go to Louisville every 1 weekend a month. He'd be with me all his vacations. But in his sophomore year of high school, when he went back to Louisville at the end of the summer, I cried all day. I could not stop crying, and I knew that at that age, right then, what I was doing was not enough. He had to have his dad more in his life. So I put the word out. I'm looking for a job close to Louisville. And I got a job in Cincinnati, Ohio. A guy named Dave Sprouse had been my mentor at AT&T. He had retired and gone back to Cincinnati, his home, and started a little consulting practice there. And his big local client in Cincinnati was the power company. And one visionary vice president at AT&T was a big, wide open company, all about career development and team building, the kind of stuff I was doing there. It was perfect. This was a power company. They were all about not making mistakes, all about not being sued. At AT&T, they'd say, the ideal is 3 years in a job and then do something else so you learn some more skills. Our vice president of human resources said in front of an all management meeting, we all know in this company that the best way to grow as a person is to get a new job and a whole new set of challenges. That was AT&T. At Cincinnati Gas, their idea of career development was train them really good in a job so they don't make mistakes and don't get us sued, and then hopefully they'll stay there forever. That's what we want. So it's an incredibly different place. But Dave was advising them. They had decided to bring, there was one visionary vice president who got a hair up his ass that they ought to have an organization development department, even though the company was not geared that way at all. But they decided to hire a manager of organization development and 2 staff. Dave in Cincinnati was advising them on the process. He says, you want to get closer to Louisville? This is 100 miles from Louisville instead of 300. I think you ought to apply for the job. And I said, great, good, works for me. I'll apply for one of the staff people because I've never managed a department like this. He says, no, apply for the manager. Apply for the manager. You could do that. You've done it at AT&T. You've got the stripes. Do it. So I didn't get the manager job. I got one of the staff jobs. And one of the reasons I got the staff job is that the head of human resources, the boss of that department, who had just hired a guy named Mark to be the new boss, said to Mark, for your staff, hire Madden as one of them, because a lot of the vice presidents actually wanted him instead of you, and that'll make them happy. Well, Mark was fresh out of school, had never done this work in his life. It was all book learning, and he knew that I had been doing it for 4 years at the largest company in the world. So this was not good news for him. He was threatened as hell from the very beginning. But I still made a real success there. I did great there. But I was missing my friends. Terrible. Cincinnati was a very buttoned down, conservative, Germanic town. Place where they would yell at you for jaywalking. And in Chicago, jaywalking was like a sport. You jaywalk. Only the black people in Cincinnati would jaywalk. They were like, fuck you, no, we're not following your norms. Town did not fit me at all. I was on an airplane going east, and the guy next to me was reading GQ magazine, and the cover story was Cincinnati, America's most uptight city. And I said, yes, somebody's naming it. And I ran and got GQ as we were changing planes and devoured that article. So Cincinnati did not fit me at all. Seeing my son twice a week instead of once a month did not help. It made it worse for me because I was saying goodbye to him twice a week, and it just rubbed my nose in the fact that he was not living in his dad's house. I wasn't there. Tried to be there as much as I could, but most of the time I wasn't there. So my sorrow about our divorce, which was the right thing, but about the ramifications of it, got deeper. I got fired from the job because Mark was so threatened. Dave says, join my firm. This will be good. We'll make this work. But Dave had one colleague who was a woman who said, 2 men and 1 woman. I'm not liking this. Dave kind of bullied her into doing it. So he brought me into his firm. It looked like I was landing real good. Mark, my old boss who had fired me, called Dave and Diane into his office and said, if Madden's in your firm, you're getting no more business here. And I know we're your biggest local client. And I know neither of you likes to travel. Diane had a fit. Dave said, okay, sorry, you can't come here. So I was broke without connections of any kind. It was looking grim. And I fell apart. I fell apart enough that my memories of sex abuse came back. I had always been a very enthusiastic, high-energy person, but never had depression. People would sometimes call me too intense, Mostly they called me enthusiastic and upbeat, but sometimes people would say you're too intense. But that upbeat stuff mostly worked for me. I worked like a dog at AT&T and thrived on it. But that whole combination of stuff, especially the sex abuse, I was a psychologist, and the idea that I can't even trust what's in my own mind, there could be all that garbage lurking around in my own brain that I didn't even know was there, blew me apart. I fell apart. And there's a guy named Stanislav Grof who's a transpersonal psychologist, the meeting of psychology and spirituality. And he says the same thing that Pema Chodron in her book When Things Fall Apart says. She's a Tibetan Buddhist, follower of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in Boulder. They both say that could be the juicy time, because you've realized that the stuff that you thought life was all about, career, family, is not working. It's a chance to let yourself unravel and get put together in a different way and find out that the real story is underneath the hood of all that. It's about who am I really? If I'm not, so I didn't have the job, I didn't have all that wild success, I didn't have money, my family situation, I looked like more a failure than ever and grieving more deeply, and I had overwhelming pain from sex abuse memories that started indirectly in dreams and got grislier and grislier until I finally remember way too many details. So I fell apart, and Grof says that in that place, if there's a shaman, if there's a genuine spiritual leader in your community, you'll go to them and they will coach you through the process of waking up to who you really are. But he goes on to say that in the US and most Western cultures, there aren't genuine spiritual leaders. There's people who have a whole lot of rules for you and try to make you fit into society better. But the real spiritual process, they don't know nothing about that. So there's nobody to help you with that. No, what we've got is doctors. Doctors are the gods, less so these days after opioids and all the stuff that's showing them to be not quite so perfect. Maybe part of the problem. But they take you to the docs, they take you to the psychiatrist, and all psychiatrists don't know jack about trauma. I wasn't even taught about trauma in clinical psychology, but I was trained right along those shrinks, and what they're trained is to be the god. A retired doctor friend of mine said, but doctors think they're gods, but psychiatrists know that they're God. But all they really have is some made-up diagnoses. They just came up with a name to put on a bunch of symptoms, and some drugs that they did by trial and error and found that this epilepsy drug seems to make that better, and they don't really know what they're doing at all, but they're faking it. And that's what they did with me. They gave me a diagnosis. I was in so much pain that although as a psychologist I always abhorred diagnoses, I'd only give them for insurance, and I'd say to the client, this isn't who you are, man. We're just giving you this name so you can get money from your insurance company. But I was so desperate. I said, give me whatever diagnosis you have to give me. If you have meds that can make this pain a little less, I'll do it. And they never made it much less at all. And one of my later psychiatrists, a really good guy, Dave Manley, I just remembered his last name the other day. I didn't. Dave says, 5%, you know? That's about the most they'll do, is they'll shave 5% off your pain. But if it keeps you from committing suicide, you may decide that's a good deal. And I did for 30 years. 30 years of hating myself, feeling like damaged goods, not looking up anybody from my past. I had never been great at that anyway, but I didn't want to see I just didn't want intimacy. Did not pursue relationships with women. I just felt so damaged. And one of the meds they gave me made me impotent for 2 or 3 years. I thought it never would come back. Yeah. So I was on the shelf for 30 years and constantly wrestling with my desire to end it all because my life had become so awful. And constantly saying, you can't do that, that's going to hurt everybody else. But one time I tried